While Gaza was collapsing under the bombings, among ruins, dust, and hunger, more than 2,000 kilometers away, the leaders of Hamas woke up every morning with a view of the Persian Gulf. Yes, the same ones who spoke on behalf of the oppressed people. They had breakfast in five-star hotels, surrounded by marble, air conditioning, and luxury cars with chauffeurs. The contrast is brutal. While the people of Gaza survived on rationed water and only a few hours of electricity, the political leadership of Hamas lived in Doha, the capital of one of the richest countries in the world. There, Ismail Haniyeh, Khaled Mashal, and Musa Abu Marzouk became a kind of revolutionary elite with golden bank accounts. Private villas, bodyguards, jet flights, dinners at the most exclusive restaurants in Qatar and Turkey. According to Israeli and Arab media and financial documents sanctioned by the United States, this leadership managed a network of companies in at least 5 countries: Sudan, Turkey, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. A disguised investment network known as the Hamas Investment Office, with a portfolio that, according to estimates, may have reached $500 million. All this while the public discourse spoke of scarcity, hunger, and resistance. But the irony doesn't end there. Qatar, the same country that hosts these figures and finances humanitarian aid for Gaza, claims that their presence there was part of a deal brokered by the United States to facilitate negotiations with Israel. A war directed from luxury suites and curved screen TVs. During the toughest years of the conflict, the leaders of Hamas in Doha spoke of sacrifice and resistance at international conferences. Meanwhile, their children studied at private universities in Istanbul, and their wives attended the most exclusive boutiques in Qatar. Images circulating on social media show high-end armored cars, homes with Italian marble, and private events in mansions with sea views. A true emirate within the emirate. And meanwhile, the people of Gaza kept waiting for aid, trapped between destruction and the blockade. Many began to ask themselves, resistance or business? Cause or facade? When October 7th changed history and Hamas plunged Gaza into its worst war, the responsible leaders were absent. From Doha, they kept sending messages of victory, while those who couldn't escape paid the price. In Gaza, there's no marble or private jets, only pain, loss, and silence. And maybe that's the greatest betrayal of all. A war fought in the name of a people by men who, years ago, lived among them. Money drives the world and revolutions. And in the case of Hamas, that revolution was built on dollars, diamonds, and oil. Behind the resistance rhetoric was a financial machine rivaling a multinational corporation. It wasn't just about simple donations or humanitarian aid. It was about a network of companies, investments, and accounts spread across half the world. The so-called Hamas Investment Office, created more than a decade ago, functioned as the true economic heart of the group. According to reports from the United States Department of the Treasury, that office operated in the main countries of the Middle East, moving hundreds of millions of dollars under false names, front companies, and seemingly legitimate transactions. The 2022 United States sanctions identified several of its operators, bankers, businessmen, and undercover agents who laundered funds coming from donations. According to declassified documents, Hamas's investment portfolio managed a value close to $500 million. Construction companies, real estate, hotels, and even cement plants. They were part of the economic empire of an organization that, in theory, represented a people who were now immersed in a war against the military power of the Middle East. Meanwhile, inside Gaza, taxes were imposed on merchants, the price of fuel was controlled, and the entry of basic goods was taxed. The people of Gaza themselves, without knowing it, were financing the luxury of their leaders. Every liter of gasoline, every sack of flour, every package that crossed the tunnel had a tax that ended up far, very far from Gaza. At the same time, Iran was transferring tens of millions of dollars annually to finance the group's military structure. It wasn't just money, it was also weapons, training, and propaganda. Part of those funds were invested, according to Israeli and Arab media, in the creation of an international network of influence, with offices and cultural centers in Europe, Latin America, and Africa, disguised as pro-Palestinian organizations. The question is inevitable. How can a movement that claims to fight for the freedom of its people accumulate such wealth while those same people live among the rubble? We're not talking about a poor rebel group, but about an elite that learned how to play in the global market, using the tragedy of their people as political capital and a source of income. War became a business, ruins became an argument, and suffering became a bargaining chip. Because in Gaza, children play among the remains of destroyed buildings, but in Doha, the children of Hamas leaders study economics, international business, and public relations, preparing the next generation of a leadership that has never known hunger. The real power lies in money, not weapons. Money that never stopped flowing, not even during the heaviest bombings by Israel. For years, Gaza was presented to the world as a territory victimized by blockade and neglect, but within its borders, the real blockade was imposed by Hamas. Lacking oil or diamonds, their wealth came from somewhere else, from the pockets of their own people. Every sack of flour that came in, every liter of fuel, every good that crossed from Egypt was taxed. A contribution, as they called it, that fed the petty cash of the regime in Gaza, which allowed the leaders, the military chiefs as well, to live like little kings within the conclave. Hamas turned the tunnels into their banking system. Meanwhile, the people survived on humanitarian aid. They amassed fortunes with taxes, smuggling fees on fuel, and absolute control over the markets. Nothing came in or went out without the movement taking its share. That internal collection network financed not only their military machinery, but also the lifestyle of their leaders. While Gaza counted the hours of electricity and rationed water, the leaders of Hamas kept their offices air-conditioned, drove luxury cars, and held accounts abroad. And so, for years, Hamas managed to maintain its control over the Strip, buying loyalties, paying its militants, and repressing those who dared to denounce corruption. The resistance became a parallel economy, a kind of business disguised as a cause. But on October 7th, 2023, everything shifted. In one day, Hamas pulled both Gaza and Israel into one of modern history's most destructive and painful wars. In the Middle East, thousands are dead, families destroyed, and both peoples traumatized. Israel, struck by the initial massacre, responded with an offensive that ended up devastating much of the enclave. Much of this infrastructure built by Israel during the years it administered the Strip turned it into something far from what it once was. One day, Gaza was practically razed. And yet, the most absurd thing is that all of this could have been avoided because all Hamas had to do was release the hostages and lay down their arms. Israel offered multiple opportunities to stop the war, international mediations, and temporary agreements. But the stubbornness of Hamas, their obsession with holding on to power at any cost, prevailed. They preferred destruction. And so, while the people of Gaza suffered, the leaders of the movement remained comfortably settled outside of Gaza, watching the tragedy from a distance. A war that they started, that they could stop, but that was never convenient to end. Hamas turned Gaza into its safe and then used it as a shield. The civilian population was their bargaining chip, their justification, their stage set. And today, as the smoke is just beginning to clear, the question remains the same. How much more will Gaza have to pay for the mistakes of a few who have never known hunger or loss? And the truth is that during this war, we found ourselves facing moments that changed everything. Sometimes one image says more than 1,000 speeches. When the Israel Defense Forces released a video showing Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, fleeing through a tunnel with his family, and many people around the world were shocked. The main focus wasn't on the feared leader escaping through the tunnels, but on his wife. There was Samar Muhammad Abu Samar, carefully dressed, accompanied by her children, and with a Hermes Birkin bag hanging on her arm. A luxury accessory whose price exceeds $30,000. At a dinner where thousands of Gazans could barely get a piece of bread, the contrast was brutal while the people survived among rubble and hunger under Israel's intense bombings. The wife of the man who had led them to war was escaping through the underground tunnels with a symbol of European luxury in her hands. That purse, more than just a detail, became a metaphor. It represented the distance between the leaders and their people, between the rhetoric of resistance and the reality of those who preached it. The one she had carried. The image spread like wildfire on social media and international outlets, not to mention within Arab networks. Some justified it, others denied it. But for millions of people, it was the confirmation of what had been denounced for years. Hamas leaders never lived like their people and cared even less about their lives. Shortly after, leaked reports claimed that Zinwa's wife had managed to leave Gaza with false documents, arriving in Turkey with her children. According to Israeli media, she remarried and currently lives abroad. None of this is a coincidence. It reflects an elite that protects itself while others are left buried under the rubble of a cause that no longer belongs to them. Sinwar himself, considered the most wanted man in Gaza, disappeared for months. In the tunnel network that his movement had built with the cement that was supposed to be used for homes and hospitals. While his people were dying, he was hiding and his family was fleeing. That scene with the bag in the tunnel marked the turning point. It not only revealed the cynicism of those who called themselves leaders, but also sparked the outrage of thousands of Gazans who, for the first time, began to publicly question Hamas. Because behind every speech about resistance, there were jewels, trips, properties, and privileges. And the purse, in the midst of the dust and darkness of the tunnel, became the perfect symbol of a lie. The lie that all in Gaza suffered the same. For 2 years, the whole world cried out for Gaza. Millions of people marched in the streets with Palestinian flags, thousands and thousands of kilometers away. In Latin America, the United States, Canada, and Europe, demanding a ceasefire, denouncing what they call genocide, ethnic cleansing, or even the provocation of a systematic famine. As the shouts filled the squares, something darker moved behind the curtain. Hamas had achieved what no other terrorist group had managed before. They turned a local war into a global cause. Their strategy was simple and effective. Control the narrative. Every image of destruction, every body, every injured child was turned into a political tool. Computer-generated images, specifically those made with artificial intelligence, fit perfectly. Meanwhile, while bombs were falling on Gaza, in Doha and Tehran, statements were being written, marches were being organized, influencers were being funded, and speeches were being distributed in dozens of languages. Thousands of young people in the West went out to protest without even understanding what they were defending, often without knowing what they were saying. Many didn't know the difference between a Palestinian, a Gazan, or an Arab. They just repeated slogans manufactured in the offices of Hamas, designed to manipulate and exploit the emotions and sense of justice of the masses. And behind all that machinery was the money. Millions of dollars channeled from Iran, disguised as humanitarian aid, were used to finance campaigns, news outlets, student groups, and international organizations, all under the same message: Hamas is the voice of the Palestinian people. But the reality is that the Palestinian people did not choose this war. It was their leaders from their mansions in Doha and Istanbul who decided to drag them into destruction, knowing that the greater the suffering, the more support they would gain in the world. Every image of ruin became an argument, every tear a tool. Israel, for its part, also got caught in this spiral. Because although its goal was to dismantle Hamas, it ended up being portrayed as the absolute aggressor. It ended up falling prey to an anti-Semitism that was revived in a way not seen since the 1930s. The pro-Palestinian discourse began to turn the world into an unsafe place for the Jewish people, unsafe for the Jewish communities living abroad. And so, Hamas achieved something that neither its weapons nor its tunnels had accomplished: a media victory. A victory based on manipulation, on the use of other people's pain, and on the systematic exploitation of a human tragedy that they themselves caused. Today, with Gaza reduced to rubble and thousands of lives lost, the world is beginning to wake up. It is discovered that humanitarian aid was diverted, that the millions in international donations never reached the civilians, and that the supposed resistance was actually a multi-million-dollar enterprise run by an elite living abroad. And now that the smoke has cleared in this ceasefire, the questions weigh heavier than the ruins. How many times can a people be destroyed in the name of their liberation? How many more lives will serve as a shield for those who were never willing to die? Hamas promised freedom but left only desolation. They vowed life and victory but brought only death. They also promised dignity. And in the end, they showed their true face, that of an organization that turned the faith and hope of its people into a business. While Gaza still mourns its dead, the leaders who dragged it into war remain in their marble mansions, far from the noise, far from the pain, waiting for the perfect moment to talk about resistance again. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted when we upload new content. Don't forget to like us. See you next time.